Just wanted quickly to cover some of the things that we're going to talk about today. So as mentioned, we're going to give you a general overview of what's available in Tableau in terms of security, specifically Tableau Server. And there are three main components to security in Tableau Server, which are authentication, so how our users basically log into Tableau Server, authorization, so the permissions and the rights that we give them inside, the permissions to content, and data security, so how the users see the data inside Tableau Server. And the first component that we're going to cover is authentication. So as I mentioned, authentication basically determines how our users log into Tableau Server. And there are a few different ways of how authentication can be set up. The two available options are local authentication and Active Directory authentication. Those options you select when you install and configure Tableau Server. So when we install Tableau Server, we run through the installation process, and then we get the configuration window here. And this is where you select the option, either local authentication or Active Directory. What's important to mention here is this option, you have to decide on it from the start. So what that means is, if you want to change it later, you can, sort of, but it's a difficult process. It's a very long process of backing up your server, uninstalling, doing the completely new clean install, and only then you can change the method of authentication. So it's always best to decide from the start. But let's go through what each of those options actually mean. So we have the first option, and I believe the default option is the local authentication. So what that means is our users, so usernames and passwords, they only exist in Tableau Server, they are stored in Tableau Server, and Tableau Server is responsible for authenticating our users, basically determining if certain user who logs in has access to Tableau Server. The way we set up local authentication, so first we obviously select the option in the settings, and then we add our users in Tableau Server interface itself. So once everything is set up, we open Tableau Server, click Add Users, and we can add our users one by one, or we can import them using a CSV template. And it's always easier, obviously, if you have tens or hundreds of users, importing them one by one is maybe not the best option. So we offer you to create a CSV list of all the different users that you want to add, and import this CSV to create users in Tableau Server. That CSV can contain a number of different sort of information about the users that you want to add. Of course, you want to have your username and password for each of the users that you want to add. The password, the administrator sets it from the start, but then the user has an option of logging in and changing his or her password to use the one that they're used to. And also we can include options like display name, so how the name is going to show for the rest of the users. We have to determine the site role, and this is something we're going to talk about in the next section, what site role actually means. But basically, that defines what permissions they're going to have inside Tableau Server, what they can do with the content. And a number of other options, the email address, maybe for subscriptions, the administrator level, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I've got one thing just to add on that. When you define that list and you've added your users to Tableau Server, you can update that list and republish it to Tableau Server to update the user list. For example, things like your site role, interactor viewer, interactor, those type of things, you can change them by changing the person on the list. You're not going to add a duplicate person if they already exist with that same ID. Passwords won't change though. Yeah, question over here. Yes, they can. Every user, when they log into Tableau Server, they can go up to My Account and change the password themselves. Cool. Yeah.
Are there any plans to have a mix of local and Active Directory authentication?
I'm not aware of the plans at the moment. There's a lot of work in deploying and getting everything ready for Linux. So I don't think that there's anything in the pipeline right now, but with the deployment of Linux, and that kind of ready and prepared, they go back to improving on the list of authentication. So for example, with Linux, we have LDAP coming as well. So there's a lot of things that are kind of in the process.
Please.
Quick question. Is it possible to set up the privacy, password privacy based on the local?
So,
For example, every 28 days,
Yeah.
Either to check password or somebody accesses the site like 3 times.
Yeah. So to repeat, the question was having some password policies and rules. So like if somebody enters the password wrong 3 times, they're blocked out of the system, or to force somebody to change their password every 90 days, something like that. That's actually something that's in the Idea Place forum that our customers have suggested, and it has a lot of upvotes that gets more exposure to the product managers. So I would advise anyone who is looking for something like that is to get onto the Idea forums and support those suggestions, those product feature suggestions. That is something that's been asked. So I wouldn't, we don't have anything in the pipeline yet for that, but do get on there and support that if you want to see that feature.
And also one last thing to mention is that this CSV template, you can upload it as a sort of one-off exercise and have all your users. However, you can keep updating that template, and we can set up scripts to automatically refresh this list of users. So for example, adding new users, or maybe deleting the users that left the company using our command line tool, tab command. So we can actually automate this process of adding and deleting users via a CSV template. And we are doing another session actually on tab command. So if you're interested about learning about that, please come. It's later today actually.
Yeah, you can just search tab CMD in the app and you'll find our session later on.
But let's talk about the second authentication option, which is integrating your Tableau Server with Active Directory. So Active Directory, for those of you who are maybe new to administering servers in general, is a Windows directory service. So basically it's a service that stores your username, passwords, and that's where you can create groups of users and manage sort of all the different users inside your organization. And what we can do is we can leverage Active Directory, so the users that exist there and the groups, and use them in Tableau Server. So to do that, so basically let's first have a look how Active Directory actually works. So our users, they do not exist from the start in Tableau Server. We sync them from Active Directory to Tableau Server. So the user names will be stored in Tableau Server. However, the passwords are only stored in Active Directory. And so what happens when the user logs in to Tableau Server takes the username, passes it to Active Directory. Active Directory tells us whether the user has access or doesn't have access to this resource. Forward. Returns the token to Tableau Server, basically saying, yes, this user should have access. And then we display content, Tableau Server content, to our users based on the roles and permissions that's been set up on Tableau Server side. So basically, we manage groups in users in Active Directory, but we manage permissions and roles, so what content they have access to in Tableau Server. And we're going to talk about it in a minute. With Active Directory, you can set up a sync. So when you set up Tableau Server, you create, your users get synced with Active Directory, but then again, you might need to update this list on a regular basis, the list of users and groups. So what will happen then is we sync users, we assign permissions and roles in Tableau Server, and then we set up an automated sync. So we can say, for example, once a week, go back to Active Directory, see what changes happened, groups updated, user is updated, and reflect that information in Tableau Server as well.
Yep.
Please.
A quick question. So whether either you're using the local or Active Directory, if you have an employee that has permissions in Tableau, that employee leaves the organization, they're no longer in Active Directory, what does Tableau do with the assets that they have created in Tableau? Do they disappear if the user?
That's a good question. So if a user has left the organization and no longer exists, and you've been removed either from local authentication or Active Directory, what happens to their assets that they've created? No, they'll remain persistent within the environment. Other users can take over projects or workbook leaders for those. So you can reassign the owner. Cool.
There is also an option to set up, for example, a user leaves. You can create a role unlicensed user, so the user can still exist in Tableau Server, but he can't access it anymore, but his content, basically, before you change the ownership, you can still keep him as an unlicensed user. And one thing to kind of notice here is Tableau Server must be installed within the domain of Active Directory. So yeah, that's for Active Directory option here. So next thing, once we have, please.
If you're using Active Directory, you have multiple Active Directory
How would they be?
Two domains.
Two domains with.
Domains. How does that work? Using Active Directory.
So, for example, do you have a parent domain or a higher level that you can? There's none. You have to choose one or the other in that case.
You know, we've actually counted that as long as there's a trust between the domains.
Yeah.
If you add the service account that Tableau Server is running under, if you whatever domain that's on, that's the default domain then for your environment. If you want to add somebody from outside that domain, you just have to append the domain in a slash to their username. When you add them, then they get added as well.
Sorry, yeah. Oh gosh, yeah, you're absolutely right. I have this with a customer as well. Yeah, so it's the domain, yeah, it's using the domain slash to add in the user. Yes, question?
Please.
So you'd first have to unlicense the user, and that would remain, so let's say Bob Smith is in the business and he has left the business, we unlicense that content, and then someone else would have to take ownership of that through the Tableau Server. You could download the workbook and republish it if you wanted to, and that would automatically have that new owner with the new published content. Yeah. No, you should just have to, you can change the owner. Yeah. Yeah.
One more thing to add on to that is that when you try and remove a user, if he has content, you can't actually remove that user until you do change the ownership to someone else.
Yeah. Good.
So yeah, let's move on to the second component of user authentication. So a lot of our customers choose to set up an environment, so what we call a single sign-on. So imagine, for example, your users don't want to explicitly enter credentials into Tableau Server. If you're already integrated with Active Directory, they're logged in into the Windows system and they are automatically authenticated with Tableau Server. And in Tableau, we support a number of different options for single sign-on. So everything from SAML, Kerberos, OpenID, integrated Windows authentication, and then we have a trusted authentication, which is a Tableau-specific option of create and trusted relationship. So I'm going to focus today on two, I guess, most kind of common options that we see our customers work with, is SAML and trusted authentication. And just to a quick note here, not all of those options are available when you use Tableau Online. Most of them are only available with Tableau Server, but with Tableau Online, we now have support for SAML and OpenID. So that will be slightly different if you're using the cloud version. So SAML. SAML is, what does it stand for again?
It's a certain markup language, so it's our method to authenticate the user through an identity provider.
Yeah, so we use an external identity provider, so there can be one login, Okta, so there are a number of different providers that SAML can work with. So basically, identity provider stores identity of users, so their usernames and passwords, and we leverage that to create this single sign-on environment. So how would that actually work? So user, with his username, wants to log into Tableau Server. He opens Tableau Server, his username gets passed to Tableau Server. Tableau Server gets his username, passes it on to identity provider, and then the identity provider might request the password of that user, or if you're already logged in into the environment before, the password will be taken automatically, it will be remembered. And then identity provider tells Tableau, yes, this user has access, and then we show him the resources that he has access to from Tableau Server. And just to give you an idea of how that works in real life, what the user actually sees when we have SAML set up, I will show you an example of something that we use internally that is customer-facing, so nothing secret here. And I'm actually going to use Tableau Online as an example. So I open Tableau Online. My username is already stored there, or I just enter it again. And I select the site that I want to log in. I'm not entering any password here. I just say sign in. And basically now, at the background, all this process is happening of Tableau Online, go into identity provider, asking if I have access to those resources, and now my resources are displayed for me here. So without entering the password, I can just have access to Tableau Online. So for my users, that's a lot easier than every time when they want to log in, they have to enter their credentials.
Yeah, and we're using one login internally in Tableau to do that. So we've got multiple applications running off that identity provider in that scenario. So we don't have to log into any of these apps. So you may have SAML solutions already in existence within your organizations.
Sorry, let's go to the next one. So trusted authentication is something specific to Tableau and specific to the scenarios where you embed Tableau Server content into an external web portal. So what will happen then? So for example, imagine you have customers that you built Tableau visualizations for, and you have a portal where those Tableau visualizations live. You want your customers to, of course, log in into your portal. There might be other resources there other than Tableau, but they log in into that portal. They have an embedded view, so you don't want them to enter those credentials again to Tableau Server to see the embedded view. You just want them to basically log in once. So what happens in this case, we use the web portal. So the client accesses the portal, the browser, basically, the user. The portal goes to Tableau Server and asks, basically, can this customer see your content? Tableau Server creates a ticket. So we have a trusted relationship where Tableau Server trusts that portal. You have to add this portal as a kind of a trusted portal. So Tableau Server returns the ticket. And then we pass the ticket to the browser, say, yes, you can access content, and then our browser requests the content, and it's returned back to us, to the client browser. Again, how it's going to look in real life? Let me show you an example. So I have a portal here. I am an organization who builds Tableau Server visualizations for the users. My user enters my portal, he has to log in, so he goes to log in. He enters his username and password. He logs in. He doesn't log into Tableau Server at this point. Then I see a number of visits that I can access. So let me just click and open this one. And I don't need now to enter any credentials to see my Tableau Server content. My content is simply displayed to me. So again, in the background, this whole process of request and access from Tableau Server happened for me, so I don't need to enter the credentials again. Sure.
Yeah, no, so you could have row-level security applied to content. So you'd have one-time development effort of dashboards for all your customers and have a user filter for customers. So as those customers approach the dashboard, they would have different dashboards or different view of the dashboard, the content. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so what we've got, actually in that example we had, I think we had some JavaScript API options here. So you do have the ability through the JavaScript API to style these options and icons to your portal's liking, to download data, to extract data, to add filters even. So to interact with that, you could develop that through JavaScript API.
So basically you have an option when you embed. You can embed with a toolbar that will have all the standard options of download, edit, so everything that you have in Tableau Server as well. Or if you want to look, for it to look a bit more integrated, sort of, you can use the JavaScript API and then create those, I guess, more sort of, the environment where those buttons kind of look like they're part of the website rather than the viz. No, you don't have to do that. You can embed a toolbar as well, and then they will just have all these options on the toolbar. So that's an option if you want to.
Yeah.
All these users need to be defined as a Tableau, or they are accessing as guests?
So the question was, are they using their own user context named user model, or are they accessing using guest? And the guest is an account that comes with 8 core installations that allows you to do stuff like this. You could have it either way. I mean, if you have an 8 core license, and you want to just display a dashboard to all your users, there's not going to be any user filtering occurring on that dashboard, but you could utilize the guest account to render and show that visualization. But for user filtering, you need a named user license model, and they need to exist. So the user that logs into the portal also needs to have a user on Tableau Server as well. Any other questions? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, you can do this for online as well. You can embed. Yeah.
You can embed, but you can't use trusted authentication with online. Yeah, you can embed Tableau Online visualizations, but no trusted authentication, unfortunately. But you can use SAML or OpenID for the same sort of environment.
Question? A server-side API? No, I don't believe so. I don't know exactly. What's the use case, would you be thinking?
Shall we?
I'm not sure. We can pick that up offline.
Yeah, just come over after we can have a look.
Yeah. 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 So the actual, the rendered portal of Tableau. Yeah, no, there are customers who actually go and they change these themselves. They go into the Tomcat files and they style it up differently. That, unfortunately, will go against your EULA that you'll have, and you'll go out of support if Tableau support find out that you're doing that. So it's really kind of, there's nothing at the moment that allows you to customize it to that level, but I mean, it's there, you could, but we wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've done some hacky stuff like that myself, just for testing and seeing how far you could push it. We've changed CSS files, we've changed lots of things to make it look completely different. So you could, but you got to be careful. Yeah, you don't want to fall out of support.
But I think that if you have a gradient logo,
yeah,
you can change the gradient to the color you want it, and then there is a part that you could put that image file where the Tableau server located.
Yeah.
If you have to run a script, actually, that's going to affect the logo on the main page and also the logo on the...
Yeah. I mean, it's all possible. You just got to be very careful that you don't go out of your support based kind of contract and that you have that support available to you if something does go wrong.
There are a number of customizations that you can do on the server side, so like logos, for example, but those are quite limited, so we recommend just embedding and creating your own portal and embedding those visits. That is fully supported and that's just easier to implement.
The only issue is that you have the logo background, it's dark blue, but there's no way to change the background color.
Okay.
Sometimes a lot of the background, we have actually companies design, but there's not way to do that because that background is blue. So like,
yeah.
That's kind of like
Yeah, no, I understand. There's nothing there to actually customize that aspect or that experience, but well, we can talk afterwards about that and see, and I can pass on any details that you want.
So I'm going to pass on to Kira now to talk about authorization, so basically determining what content and how users can see inside Tableau Server.
Yeah, so a little bit different to the authentication that Irina was talking about. Authorization will be governing the content that exists on Tableau Server. And to run over that really quick, we'll just go through the structure of the content and how it looks and feels on Tableau Server. So with all of your Tableau Server installations, you could have the option to create multiple sites. So these are separate, individual, standalone sites that could be governed by different site administrators. And kind of an example here, you can have your users specific to those sites only exist in one site. They don't have to exist across them all. They can, but you don't have to have it that way. Talking about the site roles that Irina touched on a bit ago, each user that exists within the server needs to have a site role. So server administrator is going to be able to govern all sites, see everything within Tableau Server, completely control everything. Site administrators will only have that administration role for the site that they're an admin of. Okay? And then there's the standard publisher, interactor, viewer, and unlicensed, which was always also mentioned before. Within each site, you've got containers to publish your content to, your workbooks, your data sources, and your views. Okay, just simple overview very quickly. Let me take a photo there.
By the way, the slides will be shared afterwards with you, so you can take pictures, but you can just download the deck afterwards as well.
Yeah, and there's some links here so you can learn more about site roles when you do take it back. So to give you an idea of what a structure of a customer might have, you've got different segregations. You've got HR, which they say themselves they want to have a complete segregation from all other lines of the business, and they want to govern that themselves. So a good example is you have many customers who have HR sites or external customer-facing sites that they'll build in this type of structure. To go through the levels, so you've got your logical installation. We spoke about this briefly with the system admin. You can define the user roles and the site roles for each of the users. You've got your isolation level, so your HR, your sales, your external customer-facing. You've got your organizational hierarchy, so all of the different project containers that you can store your content. And then you've got the actual content owners and the users, the end users. One thing that's coming in the 10.5 beta that was mentioned at the keynote this morning, we're going to have those nested projects as well. And that's a feature that's come from the Idea Place forum, from you guys. It's been upvoted, it's been asked for, and you can create multiple nested projects. Yeah, I was testing it last week. It's cool. It's simple, but it's so effective and good to have. Yeah. Yeah, so when you create that, we'll touch on it a bit in just a moment in the demo, but when you make that locking the permissions to the project, it'll inherit from its parent project. Okay, so to touch on, question. No, so they'll be within the same environment, and there's no way to have them, well, you could have, no, there's no way to absolutely separate them.
It's a logical separation, so you have completely separate users, you can have separate administrators. The content kind of logically doesn't mix, so, but they still exist within the same server.
Yeah. So if any of you guys are Tableau Online customers, your Tableau Online account is a site in itself. So if we've got 3 customers in the room that have sites, you all each have a site within a bigger Tableau Server environment, if you want to think about it that way.
You can have multiple sites, but then the person who wants to have access to all those sites needs to have another license for each of those. So yeah, exactly.
And this is where the nested project will be really cool for Tableau Online users. You can create that permissional structure similar to sites within one single site on Tableau Online. Yeah.
So if you have 2 sites, how does the license structure work for that? Is that like if you have a user that has a license site A and site B?
Yeah.
Is that essentially the same interaction?
It's the same named user license.
In Tableau Server.
Yeah.
In Tableau Online, there will have to be 2 separate licenses.
Yeah.
How do you make a particular site accessible externally? Is that outside the core network?
No, so you can't specifically expose a site and not the other site. You'd have to expose the entire Tableau Server environment through a reverse proxy or some other solution, port forwarding or whatever you have in existence.
For the enterprise license, so we can enable the anonymous access based on the Tableau Server.
Yeah.
Is it possible, or maybe in the future, you guys will work on to enable the anonymous access based on the individual site?
I'm not sure. I haven't heard anything specific about that, but you can come up, we'll take details about it and we can pass it on for feedback from TC. Cool. I'm going to keep moving because we're very conscious of time here. So permissions here. So you're able to apply permissions for each of your contents. And this is a very standard window. I think we even saw a screenshot of this this morning at the keynote. But you'll be able to check on what groups have permissions. You can expand on all these columns that you have. I'll go into it a bit now in a moment in the demo. But you we'll see the different roles. So we've selected a particular group here. We can see down below which users of that group have access to what. What can they actually do with the content? Okay, and we'll touch on, we've got a few scenarios to go through with that. Permission best practices, this is obvious to probably most people, but I run into it so many times with customers, especially customers who are, it's their first BI application that they're owning and that they're going to control, is assigning permissions from groups to content as opposed to users to content. I see this all the time, and then there's a nightmare trying to fix and clean up the environment and make sure that somebody doesn't have access, and then they do have access, and then they lose complete control. So from the very beginning, just to use your Tableau Server, do it from groups to projects. We've got a little bit of a flowchart here. It's a difficult one to consume and digest in a sitting like this, but to take it away and use it with examples within your own organizations, this is very beneficial. So bear with me as we talk about it. So the first thing is, for any access to content or to a specific feature, let's say web edit or download or save as, we have to ask the question, has the user been specifically allowed, or sorry, specifically denied the access to that feature or to access that content? That's the first question we have to ask. If yes, then that's it. It's been denied. The user role or the user compared to the group, that will supersede everything. Okay, so you've got site role at the very top. If the site role doesn't allow someone to do something, let's say you've made a site role a viewer, and then you go down and you're expecting that user to be able to edit content, do web editing, that's not going to be possible. And we'll go through that in the scenarios. Looking at have they been allowed? Have they been specifically said, yes, they have access to this feature or to this content? Then yes, they'll be allowed. No, has a group been denied? Now we're going down to the group level of the checks. Yes, then we deny. No, we move on. And have they been specifically allowed the capability? So I'll just put that up there. I don't require you guys to digest it right now. Take it away, run through examples yourself, and play and practice with it. It's the best way to kind of go through this. It's not very digestible on first glance. Oh, sorry, were you taking a shot there?
Please.
Great question. Yeah, and we'll touch on that as one of the best practices for permissions. So setting the permissions for default projects to none for all users. So all users is the default group that exists within Tableau Server, and your default project will have all users and it'll be set to none. That's saying, I'm not saying they have access, I'm not saying they don't have access, I'm going to let another level of permission hierarchy determine whether they have access. Okay, but if you were to set this all users to denied, they're not going to see anything. Second one, adding users to groups. We just spoke about it just there, and then applying permissions based on groups. And creating projects, and especially with the nested projects, you'll be able to get more out of this too. And assigning permissions to projects based on groups. Okay, so I'll just give you a quick look at the environment here. So I've got my site user. So I've got some users already created within my Tableau Server environment. I've got some groups as well here, some for Irina's demo, some for my demo. If we take a look very quickly at permissions, at a project level, I can just select permissions here and take a look at how my users are determined. So I can expand any of these. It's not immediately obvious to everyone that you can expand these columns to get more granular detail of the permissions that people have. So do know that that is available to you so that you can expand and see. You'll notice very quickly that although, for example, Darth Vader, my user, exists within the Star Wars group, he's got different permissions to Luke Skywalker, and they're both within the same group. And we'll touch on that in the scenarios in just a minute. Any questions on that? Yeah. Yeah, so none will act like denied. None will say, I'm not going to determine this level of permissioning. So if you have a project, we'll go through one of the scenarios actually now. We'll probably answer your question
basically
perfectly.
none, so do you remember the diagram that we looked at where is this user denied, et cetera, et cetera? So none is neither explicitly denied or explicitly allowed, so you have to go through this hierarchy of what they can do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're basically saying not.
Well, sorry. You go first.
So none is basically deferring to a lower level to decide.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If there are no permissions at the lower level, what does none do?
The person's not going to be able to have access to that content.
Okay, it acts as if it's another.
Yeah, we're gonna go through. There's 3 scenarios that probably will give you ideas or you'll be able to relate to for this that I'll run on to. Yeah.
So for example, I have a site, right? It's for all users can view it, and this one person that I have to create just a work, it's her own workbook.
Yeah.
And then I have to change that person access to none. So anybody in that global user and only 2 person that I have that publish the workbook, she set up as a none, no one else can view it, right?
Yeah.
Besides her, or she wants one other person.
Yeah, one of the best practices takeaways for this section here will be, I'll talk about this none and how we can kind of use that going forward. I'll just keep going here. So I'll just jump into the scenarios because I think that they are probably going to make the most sense or something just to relate to. So the first scenario being my user Darth Vader has a site role of viewer. So we're talking about the very, very high level site role of viewer. But a group he's a member of implies that he can publish content. So other users that are publishers and interactors, they have the ability to do this, but he is a member of a group. Do you think that he'll be able to edit the content or not? Yeah, exactly. So it's driven from the very highest level to site role. So no, the answer is, yeah, he won't be able to access it. This is why he appears like this when we drill down and examine what the permissions that have been assigned to that group. So he's just grayed out. And that's essentially none for that viewer role. Another scenario, Luke Skywalker is leaving the business. I want him to restrict downloading workbooks or underlying data before he leaves. Can I achieve this by adding specific user-based permissions for him to allow him to still work, but restrict him from doing some things? So can we do that? Yeah, so we just do it at the user level. So we spoke about the site level, now we're talking about the user level, and even though he might be in a group for his team, we can just say, look, Luke's leaving the business. This is the one time I could probably get away with having a permission set on a user level. At the same time, you could have a group that says leaving the business, and that could have those permissions defined there, and he could be a member of that group, and it would still prevent him from downloading the content. And then taking a look at that, we could just set it at a user level or have that group of people leaving the business. Yeah? Yeah, exactly. So that's the leaving the business group I was just talking about there. Scenario 3. Obi-Wan Kenobi's just started with our organization. He's been assigned the role of publisher from a site level, but nobody's actually granted him access to any group. So I haven't put him into a group yet. He's got his user account. Is he able to see anything on the server? We're talking about that this all users, none scenario. He's not going to be able to see anything until he's dropped into a group where he's been granted access. So again, the takeaways from this. A user's site role determines the maximum permission potential for that user. User permissions supersede group permissions. Denied supersedes allowed always. And setting none will result in a denied-like behavior if no other permissions are applied. One thing to note is with the default project within Tableau Server, that is the template for every new project that you're going to create afterwards. So whatever permissions you define on that default project, that will be inherited by every new project that you create. Yep.
Are there any features coming where you can impersonate a user to verify that you set up the permissions correctly?
It's a good question. Without actually being the whole server admin, kind of like with Tableau Desktop where you can do the user filtering. I'm not aware of anything, but again, I'll take feedback at the end that I can bring back to the product team. Okay, any other questions on that side of things? Yes? Yeah, so the server admin is going to have access to everything. If you're a server admin, you're going to be able to set permissions for all content and all users.
I guess it's more of a best practice approach. You can't explicitly kind of close that option, but you should adopt the best practice approach to add-in groups.
Yep.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's the locking to the project option. I can show you very quickly here. So, sorry, it was in that window there. So I can have this permission here. So if I just zoom up to this one here. So I can have this managed. Any content I publish to that will inherit the permission set at that level. Yes, there's a scenario where that will occur, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I've come across that as well. Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Okay, so our last kind of topic that we wanted to discuss. So once we have, I guess our users are logged in and we told them, we determined what those users can see. Sorry, I'm a bit confused. So yeah, what another sort of layer that we can add to that in terms of security is that we can determine inside their content that they have access to what data can they actually see. So to give you a scenario of how that can be used, in Tableau, for example, we have a number of sales teams for different regions. So one sales team consists of a number of salespeople and they have their manager. What our analysts do, for example, we want to track how our salespeople achieve in their quota. What our analysts do, they will not build a workbook for each salesperson so they can see only their own data. They will build one workbook for the whole team, but inside that workbook they will say this user can see this data, this user can see that data, but their manager can see everything, all the data about all users. And the way that we can set it up, so this data security, there are two ways actually. So we can take the security that's already set up in our data source. So for example, on the database, you might have all your users already exist there. You determined what data they have access to. So we can leverage that in Tableau to determine which data we're going to display to the users. And we're going to have a look how that looks like, how we can leverage that. If you don't have this scenario set up on a database, your database doesn't support that, or using Excel, or using Tableau Data Extract, then we can set up data security on Tableau level using user filters. And we're going to show you how you can do that, a couple of different approaches. But let's start with database security and how we can leverage that in Tableau. And Kieran going to work through that.
Yep. So the example we're going to work on today is going to be connecting to a SQL server. And we've got two options available to us there. So we can use those Active Directory credentials that I've already logged into our laptop with. So it can be a seamless transition. So if I go into my Tableau desktop, I will choose SQL Server, and I've got my IP and my port of my server there, and then I've got the option to choose either the Windows authentication or a specific database username and password. So for Windows authentication, I've already logged into my laptop, I've been authenticated, the Tableau server will know who I am. I can just sign in like so. So any policies that I've defined on the database from restrictions for what my user can do, that will exist and be followed through into Tableau. So I'm just going to connect to a table and show you the options that you will have when you eventually publish this content to Tableau Server. So this might be a bit slow because I don't actually mind as a view. It can be any piece of content on SQL. But as soon as I have the option to publish, I will have this authentication when I'm publishing the data source to Tableau Server. Oh, I'm across. And here's the options. I've got a drop-down list here available to me. So I've got server run as user account. You may have your Tableau Server running with Tableau Server or some kind of username that you can identify who they are from an AD perspective. And you could just use that, use as a run as server account for your connections.
So this you basically embed this user into that data source, and there will be no difference of how users see the data. They will all see the data the way Tableau Server sees the data.
Yeah.
So then you can either implement user filters on top of that, or if you want them all to see the same data, that's the approach that you can take.
Yeah, and then we've got the other option, which is impersonating via the run as user account. And that will essentially, Tableau Server will authenticate with AD through the run as user account, but will take your user context with the query that's going to be generated against SQL and return only results that are adhering to your policies that you have within your SQL environment. To give you an idea of the other options, so if I add another data source really quickly, SQL Server again, same database, same environment. I'll just use the database username and password. And again, choose any of my tables. And come over here to publish this one. You have the following options. So I can prompt the user, so the visualization that will ultimately be appearing within Tableau Server, I can have the user be prompted to enter their database username and password. I can embed the password if I don't want my customer or my end users or my customers or whoever I'm providing the content to know or have credentials back to my database. I can just embed them and have Tableau handle that completely. And then I can impersonate via the embedded password as well, which is similar to the previous example where we had Active Directory and we are using the account with the embedded password to authenticate, and then we're trying to find out if that user's context exists on the database as well. Yeah. Preventing users, so that's an option. You can't disable that from the desktop tool. If they have access to desktop and they have access to SQL Server, they can embed it. There's no way to flag that on or off from a configuration window. It's in. No. Yeah. Okay. So there are the two options. Any other questions there? I mean, we're using SQL Server as an example here, but could easily be other data sources that you have that share the same. So we have to go through the Tableau Server account, the run as user account for Tableau Server. So that connection between Tableau Server's environment and the database environment, that has to be handled through that run as user account. Between domains, the request is going to be sent from that run as user account. No, I don't believe so. Yeah. 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 No. Yeah, no, we need to do this because we need to have that server environment communicate and be able to communicate with the SQL Server environment.
Cool. So imagine we don't have that option of setting up security on our data source. Maybe we are using a Tableau data extract, which exists in Tableau Server, and it's sort of a static file, same for everyone. So what options do we have to then restrict access to certain data for all the different users? We can set that up in Tableau directly. And there are a couple of different approaches that you can take to set up this data security in Tableau, and I'm going to show you an example how you can use both of those. So imagine I am, for example, an administrator. I create a visualization. I have all my data for all my European countries in this data by default. I'm an admin, I can see everything. But now I have a number of groups that exist in my Tableau Server, so I can see them all here. So I have central, where people who manage central region are a member of. I have north and I have south. And I want to say that people from the central group should only be able to see data for their central region. So how can I set this environment up? The first approach and the easy approach would be to go and set up a user filter. So I need to go to server, say I want to create user filter. I have to select a dimension on which this user filter kind of will run. So in my case, I want to restrict data by region. So I select region here so that the dimension exists in my data. And I get a little dialog here where I can simply say, okay, let's say all users have access to nothing by default. Central will have access to my central region, north to north, south to south, and me as an admin, I want to have access to all. And now just click OK. You will see a set gets created here, says user filter. So all I need to do is just drag that set on the filter shelf, and now this user filter will be applied. So as I publish this, when someone from central group logs in, and I can replicate this scenario here, so as an administrator, I can pretend I'm someone from the central group. Let's just do that. So when they log in and open this dashboard, that's what they will see. They will only see data for their specific region. The same goes for all other regions. So change this to north now, and we'll see that the data is restricted to just north.
I have a situation where everybody can see summary level data, but individual role level data would need to be identified as a college situation, so for federal guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So is there a way to allow that?
Mm-hmm.
Summary, but not drilling
Yeah.
down unless you meet the criteria?
So we can have a look at that, because there are, I'm going to show a set of calculated functions and calculated fields that you can use to also determine who has access to which data, and that potentially can be applied on kind of different worksheets. You can have different sort of set of rules rather than have one for the workbook. But this is, the first approach, and that's quite easy to set up. You just choose region, which group has access to this region, etc. The problem with that is, if I now publish this workbook to Tableau Server, and my users, for example, have permission to download this workbook or to web edit this workbook, they will download it from server, they will get this, they will come into this view and they're, oh, user filter, let me just take it off. So they take it off and they have access to everything. That's not what we want. So really this approach can only be used if you don't give your users permission to edit or permission to download workbooks. Otherwise they will be able to see all the data if they just drag that filter off. So to prevent this, we have another approach that you can adopt. So to do that, what you will need to have is some table that just defines this sort of permissions in my data. So I can say that the username of Ross something has access to North, etc., etc. So I have this determined in a table who has access to which region. So what I can do now is I can take this table, so my people table that define those roles, and join it to my actual data. And once this join is created, what you'll see is now every single row of my resultant data source has a people column, and every single row actually shows me who of my users have access to this specific row of data. And then we can go ahead to the actual view, and we can define this calculated field that will say, it's very simple, username equals people, so that will check someone that logs in, does his username match something in my people column, basically. And what I can do now is, I could, of course, drag it on filters and say true, and now someone from North, sorry, specific username logs in, and that's how they see their data, just for North. Or, of course, they can still drag it off. So to prevent them from dragging it off, I'm going to add it as a data source filter. So I will add it as a data source filter. I will say user filter should always equal true, and say OK. And now when I publish this data source to Tableau Server, so the published data source, only me as an owner will be able to edit this data source. So all my users, even if they have permission to edit the workbook, they won't be able to edit data source filters. So that way, even if they download it, they will still see only the data that we give them access to. Yeah. So this is a second sort of more robust, I guess, approach where the users cannot see the data that we don't want them to see. So just to quickly summarize, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
if you have to have a reference to that table, so if it's an Excel file or it's a table in your database, as long as it has access to that table, it'll be refreshed with an extract. No. No. We just have to make sure. So for example, in that scenario, lots of people just build a very quick Excel file, and then when they publish to Tableau Server no longer can reference that Excel file. So you just have to make sure it's either on a shared drive or you build the data source connections within the Tableau Server environment using desktop and then publish them there, localhost. You just have to make sure and qualify that that's resolvable, because otherwise it'll never refresh correctly. Yeah.
With a large data set that's joined to a table, if you have 100 users, what can multiply by that?
So it's only one, so it's two columns that you'll add in to the data set, so it adds 2 wide, but if you were using multiple users having access, I would do it from a group perspective. I could do groups instead of individual users. That would make more sense. Otherwise, you'd explode your data out, whatever number of users you had.
Well, please, over there.
Quick question. You were talking about authorizations in the beginning. You didn't speak about the dash user. Because I noticed when I embedded dashboard, the person, when you look at the statistics, it doesn't tell you who accessed the dashboard. It just uses the dash user. So is there a way to tell who actually is accessing the dashboard and not allow the dash user to have access?
We can have a look at the scenario. Just come afterwards. We'll
Yeah.
test.
We're just
have
at
a
the very
guest
end, just for the
user.
summary
Yeah,
section.
Because I see a lot of people start going to other sessions. So we just quickly wrap up, I guess. I guess the most important, the summary, we all know what we talked about. But the most important thing, we wanted to suggest you some other sessions to go to, because we covered very briefly each of those aspects. There's so much more to kind of learn and know. So there is a specific session about authentication tomorrow. And on Thursday, there are sessions about, so the content strategies one discusses permissions in detail, the authorization part. And there is a row-level security session on Thursday as well, if you want to learn more about restricting access to specific data inside the content. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but we're still here, so please come over with any questions that you have. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your conference.
And don't forget to use the survey app as well.
Please leave the feedback.